Hey, welcome to Motivation Monday with Pastor Josh. Motivation is the act or instance of motivating, providing with a reason to act in a certain way. We're going to look at what that looks like today on this edition of Motivation Monday. Hey, welcome to the podcast today. I want to do something different over this next week. We just had a special speaker come in, and so I'm going to be going over his notes, honestly, his sermon, and tackling each one of his points this week and just kind of expounding on it a little bit. We just had Pastor Norm Christofferson here, just real recent here at Chinook Assembly. And so we're going to go through that sermon. You can see it online. You can go back and watch it. I encourage you to do that because we're just going to be expounding off of that this week. But before I do that, I want to give a little bit of a commercial on our podcast for the next few weeks because I just finished reading a book that was really an amazing book, honestly. It had been on my shelf for a while. I don't know if you've ever done that, where you get a book, you're like, oh, I'm going to read that, and then you put it on the to-read pile, or the to-read bookcase, which is what my situation is. And it just keeps getting put down, further and further, until you just feel like you should read it. And so that happened. I finally read the book. I got it about 4 years ago, and it's this book called Unoffendable by Brant Hansen. It's a very good book. And so my plan is to kind of talk about it and talk about what God has done in my life and some of my perspective and just kind of walk through the book a little bit, almost like a book study. And so if you're interested in doing that, we're going to start doing that July 6th on our podcast. So if you don't want to get the book or nothing like that, that's okay. I think you'll get a lot out of it. But if you want to get the book, I'm giving you some time. July 6th, we're going to be going through this. And I don't know exactly how we'll do that yet. Maybe we'll do a chapter at a time. It's 24 chapters. They're not real long chapters, but we'll just kind of talk about it, or maybe a little differently. So we'll see what that looks like, but we're going to start it on July 6th. So if you want to get a copy, you have time to purchase one, order one, and I think it'll be awesome. It's Unoffendable, How Just One Change Can Make All of Life Better. Well, as we start today, Pastor Norm, he talked about the storms of life. And he used a really iconic passage from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. I encourage you to go ahead and turn there if you have a Bible with you. If you don't, I encourage you to do that when you have some time. Just open up the passage and read it. I'm not going to read it necessarily today. I'm just going to summarize some of it and allow you to listen to his message, which is online on all our platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Church Online. You can find it on any of those places. Just the sermon or the service itself, which I think you would enjoy. So let's jump into the first point. I'm just going to tackle each point one a day, Monday through Thursday, and then we'll have our Fun Friday podcast. And so today for Motivation Monday, I want to tackle the first point. He says the disciples were in a storm, which that sounds like like they were in a storm. But I think that's important to note because it's important to recognize when you're in a storm. I don't know if you've ever been in those moments where you're driving and all of a sudden you come upon a storm and you're like, oh, I see that storm in the distance, or there's a storm coming upon us. It changes a little bit of the attitude of how you journey. And so Pastor Norm was talking a lot about that. He was talking about how the disciples came into a storm. When we were in this Israel area a couple years ago, we had the opportunity to spend several days around the Sea of Galilee, which I really enjoyed. I loved the Galilee area. It's very rural, very small town. Still to this day, it's not, there's tourist things, but really for the most part, it's almost like they kept it the same and just changed the buildings. It's amazing. It hasn't just, multiplied in population so greatly that it doesn't resemble what it might have been back then. And so as we were around the Galilee area, and we spent one moment where we were on the Sea of Galilee in a boat, worshiping the Lord and just, and singing together and just looking at the scenery, enjoying just being on the Sea of Galilee. And it was so serene, it was so beautiful, it was so calm. And I can't help but think during all of that, man, what about the storm, Jesus? What about the storm? Like, I was trying to picture the Sea of Galilee with the storm raging. And I just couldn't picture it. I couldn't see it. And so then the next day, we're driving on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. We're going up north to Tel Dan and to Caesarea Philippi. and we're driving along that eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and I look over and I'm looking at the sea, and I couldn't believe it, but it was so wild and crazy and almost like destructive. The waves themselves had to be anywhere between 5 feet to 15, almost 20 feet in places. The waves were crazy, and I couldn't believe it. I was looking at it thinking, man, how in the world could that Sea of Galilee get to be that crazy into certain places? And so I asked our guide, I said, Yuval, how could the storms be so crazy here? I mean, do storms happen often on the Sea of Galilee? Because he's a local, he grew up there. And he says, yeah, they do. He says they happen a lot. And the reason why is because there is a wind channel from the northwestern portion of the Sea of Galilee between Mount Tabor and Mount Arbel that leads to the Jezreel Valley. And it goes all the way over to Mount Carmel by the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the ocean. And so the wind comes ripping off of that Mediterranean Sea and ends up going through this wind tunnel. And so by the time it reaches the Sea of Galilee, it's really cooking. I mean, it's 125 miles per hour sometimes. I mean, it's amazing how much the wind can blow through there because of that wind channel. And so I was thinking, I was like, man, okay, because there's a little bit of me that couldn't picture Jesus having this storm on the Sea of Galilee, because the Sea of Galilee is not that big. It's smaller than the Flathead Lake. And so, I mean, putting it in proportion, it's like, well, how could it possibly be that crazy, that big of a storm there? Well, there's a lot of factors that go into it that just make it a natural place for storms to arise. And so it caused me to think about the story of Jesus and the disciples, and Jesus is sleeping in the boat, and the disciples recognize that a storm has come upon them, and it's a fierce storm, it's a fierce squall, wind is crazy. I mean, they're in danger of the boat being capsized, of the water is just sloshing in. And can you imagine what that was like for them? Who they didn't have motors back then. I mean, it was a lot harder for them to fight the elements. And they were already, I mean, they were accomplished fishermen, but even then, in that moment, being on the sea where the storm is raging, every fisherman knew to respect the storm. But when storms came, it was a pretty big deal. So it causes me to think about the storm that we're all in. And Pastor Norm talked about how a storm is a disturbance of the normal condition. Well, I don't know about you, but it doesn't feel like we're in a normal situation right now with everything going on. And so I want to encourage us right now that even though there's storms that are raging, that's not all there is. There's something else going on here. Those storms are used by God to bring us to our destination. I think of the story of Paul, where he was shipwrecked on the island of Malta. You ever wonder why he was shipwrecked there? I mean, he was on his way already to go see Caesar, so he could be imprisoned by Caesar. Wasn't it already bad enough for Paul? But he has to have this pit stop in the island of Malta. So God allowed the storm to shipwreck them so that Paul could have a moment where he has this opportunity with this huge official, this tribe official on the island of Malta, where this whole island hears the gospel because Paul has this unfortunate event where they have the shipwreck and he gets bit by a snake, and then they thought he was going to die, but he didn't. So they're like, oh, who is this guy? What's the message he brings? And then it opened up a huge door. All this stuff that happened to Paul opened up a door for him to share the gospel with the whole island of Malta. And so, man, it's kind of amazing when we look at the storm that we're in. I have to wonder, God, what is it you're doing? Because when storms arise, it's an opportunity for us to see God do something we didn't expect. What is it he's wanting to do in our lives? I would encourage us to lift our eyes and understand that the storm is temporary, but there's also purpose in the storm. And so I want to encourage us with that today, that don't let your life focus on the shipwreck. Don't focus on the shipwreck. Don't focus on the storm. Don't focus on those things, but understand that there's more than meets the eye in this situation. And so ask the Lord today, what is it he's doing that you don't see in the middle of this storm? This has been Motivation Monday with Pastor Josh. Thanks for tuning in. Tomorrow we'll talk about point number 2 of Pastor Norm's sermon about the storm. And so I encourage you, go back and watch it, read the story, chew on this a little bit today, and we'll see you tomorrow.